July 2009 in La Plata County, Colorado. The Reynolds family, 38-year-old Michael, his wife Carolyn, and their 10-year-old daughter Emma, were planning a short trip to the mountains. They lived in Durango, in a house on the outskirts of town, and such trips were a regular occurrence for them. That coming weekend, they were heading to the Rocky Mountains for a few days to get away from the city and spend time together. According to neighbors, the family left the house in the morning with backpacks, several blankets, and food. Michael said they planned to spend the night in a trailer they had rented through friends. Neighbors saw him close the gate and say that they want to go hiking and come back on Monday. These were the last reliable reports of their whereabouts. The first few hours after their departure seemed completely normal. At 2 p.m., Michael last made contact, sending a short message to his brother. "Everything is fine, we are parking." Then there was silence. The phones stopped answering, and no more calls or text messages came. The evening of that day passed without any signs of alarm. The family was due to return in 2 days, and no one immediately noticed the lack of news. It was only on Monday, when Michael did not show up for work at the auto repair shop, and Carolyn did not come to the school where she worked as a librarian, that relatives began to call. Their cell phones still did not answer. By evening, it became clear that the family had indeed disappeared. The police noted several important details. First, all their bank accounts remained untouched. Second, no money, documents, or personal belongings were missing from the house. Third, the neighbors insisted that they had only gone away for the weekend. Later, witnesses came forward who had seen a similar trailer traveling north on a mountain road. It was a white single-axle trailer with dark windows, but it was not possible to determine where exactly it had stopped. The roads led to dozens of branches, and there were no official records or registrations. The atmosphere in the early days was tense, but there was no sense of tragedy yet. Everyone believed that it was either a breakdown or a communication problem. However, the clock was ticking relentlessly. After 2 days, the search began officially. Hotels, campsites, and roadside shops were checked. There was no confirmed trace. It is important to note that from the very beginning, the police had no starting point. Usually, disappearances begin with a car near a trailhead or a parking lot at a campground. Here, there was nothing. No car, no traces. This immediately made the case almost hopeless. The atmosphere of those days is captured in the reports. A map of the mountains hung on the wall of the search headquarters, with red marks indicating the sectors that had already been checked. The list of items the family took with them included blankets, a gas burner, 3 backpacks, and a small supply of food. Everything else was left at home. By the end of the week, local newspapers were writing about the mysterious disappearance of a family from Durango. Relatives gave interviews, insisting that the Reynolds had no problems and that no one was planning to run away. "They just wanted to go hiking," Carolyn's mother repeated. Thus began a story that would stretch over 14 years. On Tuesday morning, when it became clear that the family had not returned, the police reclassified the incident from late to probable disappearance. The investigator on duty recorded the standard set of actions: contacting relatives, checking local hospitals, calling the school where Carolyn worked, and the company where Michael was supposed to be working. The response was the same at all 3 locations. They hadn't shown up, they hadn't warned anyone, and this had never happened before. The first few hours were spent on a simple but critical task: reconstructing their last confirmed trajectory. It turned out that there were no hard movement markers. After a short message around 2 p.m. on Saturday, the family's phones stopped registering on the network. A request to the operator only gave a rough coverage cone, a sector north of the city. For 2009, this was normal accuracy, but for a search, almost useless. Next, banks. No transactions on debit and credit cards since Sunday. No cash was withdrawn from ATMs. In the living room of the house, an envelope was found with a receipt for the purchase of a gas canister and dry rations, paid for in cash the night before. The cameras at the gas station, where the purchase was likely made, stored recordings for 3 days. By the time the investigator got there, a news cycle had already been recorded. There were no available videos for the relevant time period. They checked the places where such trips usually begin: popular trailheads, campsites with mandatory registration, and state forest parking lots. Their names were not in the arrivals and departures log. Rangers from the 2 nearest areas sent short notes to headquarters. There were many people on the weekend, but a family with a child and a white single-axle trailer is too general a description, and they saw several such families. They did not find a single stop that could be confirmed by a document or license plate number. The third line of inquiry was the highways. Patrols read license plate numbers at key exits, but in 2009, automatic license plate readers were only installed in certain areas. A search of highway segments over the weekend yielded nothing. The edge shields with cameras on bridges only stored photos of incidents, not a continuous stream. It turned out that the family had left the city and disappeared between the road sensors. Meanwhile, in the Reynolds yard, a forensic investigator photographed the driveway. Tire tracks indicated a departure with a trailer. Characteristic arcs from maneuvering with a ball hitch. Slight dragging of the right wheel. In the trash can was an empty box from under the blankets, with no receipts inside. On the stove was still warm residue from a coffee pot, and in the sink were 3 cups. The house looked as if the people had gone out for 2 days and were due to return. The neighbors were interviewed again. 2 of them mentioned specific time frames. One heard the sound of an engine and a metallic clanging, similar to a trailer chain, early Saturday morning. The other recalled that Carolyn had asked her for spare batteries for a flashlight the day before. None of the witnesses could say for sure which direction they had left in. The police had bright spots on the map, but no route. On the second day, investigators set their priorities. They initiated a voluntary check of private cameras at gas stations, roadside cafes, and city exits. Almost everywhere, the answer was the same. The recordings are overwritten every 2 to 3 days. Where laser discs were still stored, the image was either of poor quality or the cameras were positioned so that they only recorded the checkout area. On Monday evening, the first maybe came in. The owner of a small shop on the northern outskirts remembered a white trailer without any identifying stickers. The image from his camera showed only the bright spot of the headlights and the edge of the side. The number plate was invisible. At the same time, they worked on the entry points into the forest. Rangers sent information about roads closed due to heavy rains, landslides on mountain trails, and temporary barriers. If the family had taken the official road, they would have hit a checkpoint barrier and left a trace in the logbook. That did not happen. There were still unofficial forest branches, old service roads to former logging sites and mines. Their list took up several pages. It was impossible to check them all in a day, even with a large force. The headquarters prepared a circle of uncertainty, a radius within which they could theoretically have disappeared. Each additional hour increased the search area geometrically. Without a reference point, the algorithm blurred into everywhere and nowhere. It is at this stage that inertia sets in. Volunteers are ready to go into the forest, but they don't know where. Helicopters can fly, but they don't have a window, that narrow strip where the chances of seeing objects from the air increase. On the third day, the human factor was scanned separately. Relatives confirmed that there were no plans to flee and that belongings and documents had been left at home. There were no debts, legal disputes, or recent conflicts. Michael had recently negotiated a promotion, and Carolyn was preparing the library for the school year. The day before, their daughter had taken a book about hiking out of school. Standard risks, marital crisis, hidden relationships, gambling were ruled out. Only the road and the forest remained in sight. On the fourth day, the investigator called the owner of the trailer, an acquaintance of Michael's who had rented the trailer through a friend. He explained that it was old, without any brand names, listed in the paperwork as converted, with a VIN in the database, but the registry system was not synchronized with traffic cameras at the time. In other words, the trailer existed legally, but it did not always leave an automatic trail on the road. The owner could not name the route. They took it from the yard and said they were going to the mountains for the weekend. The fifth day brought only statistics. The campsites were checked. No Reynolds registration. The spare trails, no new tracks. Private cameras, mostly rewritten. Mobile phones, silent. Banks, no movement. A short message from Saturday remained the last time beacon. The headquarters updated the map. The red squares combed were replaced by a solid pink field, probably clean, which guaranteed nothing. On the sixth day, when it became clear that even with intensive searching of the areas, a chance find was almost unrealistic, the operation coordinator changed the wording of the tasks. Instead of searching for people in distress, they switched to searching for a starting point. In other words, any small piece of evidence that would reveal where they had been. A bottle cap with a specific batch barcode, a piece of a map with a mark on it, tire tracks in the mud that matched the tread of a trailer. In practice, this meant moving not deep into the forest, but across the perimeter. Roadside parking lots, old clearings, descents to the water, places where cars often turn around. By the end of the week, the main word of this chapter, uncertainty, had become established in the case. Not because no one was doing anything, but because the facts did not form a line. The route disappeared between the city and the first mountain arc, as if it had been erased from the map along with phone signals and camera recordings. It was this void that would eventually drag the search out for months, and the case for years. The first week of the operation was a test for everyone. A full-scale search was launched in the La Plata district. A headquarters was set up in the gym of a local school, with tables laid out with maps, monitors, and radios. Volunteers, the National Guard, and search and rescue teams from neighboring districts joined the police. Helicopters buzzed in the sky, combing the areas around mountain roads and ravines. Their searchlights cut through the darkness of the night, but there was no sign of the white trailer or the people. On the ground, dog handlers and their dogs walked step by step through the canyons, combing dry riverbeds and checking abandoned huts. The dogs picked up the scent only occasionally and immediately lost it among the dust and rocks. Every morning, headquarters drew up new maps of the sectors. Red lines marked the routes that had been covered. But with each passing day, these squares were filled in, and there were no results. The atmosphere was becoming increasingly difficult. The heat during the day reached 30 degrees, and at night the temperature dropped sharply. The volunteers were exhausted, and some gave up the search after 3 or 4 days, explaining that it was physically impossible. The report on the 5th day was typical. No material findings, no witnesses, 0 confirmed traces. It didn't even look like an accidental crash. Usually, searches yield at least some debris, a torn bag, a bottle, a piece of fabric. Here, they found nothing. Horse patrols were brought in to cover a larger perimeter. They combed through old forest roads that had been used by miners and loggers for decades. But even there was silence. Some paths were littered with rocks and trees after storms. Others were so overgrown that it was almost impossible to walk on them. A week later, investigators began to check possible illogical routes. Among the versions, they could have turned not onto the main road, but onto an old service road that had long been closed. But there were no cameras or witnesses left. Volunteers recall that the 8th day of the search was special. The temperature dropped sharply at night, and several rescuers recorded the first cases of frostbite. 2 were hospitalized. The headquarters decided to reduce night patrols, leaving only key points covered. This caused conflict. The Reynolds' relatives demanded that the search continue, but there was not enough physical strength left. Newspapers ran sensational headlines. Family disappears without a trace in the mountains. Mysterious evaporation in La Plata County. Journalists stood outside headquarters, filming volunteers and helicopters, but increasingly asking uncomfortable questions. Is the operation a failure? On the 10th day, the police report sounded hopeless. No evidence of the family's presence in the specified area. This phrase formed the basis of all subsequent reports. It highlighted the main problem. They didn't even have a starting point. The atmosphere of those days is captured in the details of the reports. Wet folders with maps, coffee cups lost in the chaos, the tired faces of volunteers. Photos of Michael, Carolyn, and Emma appeared on bulletin boards around the city with the word missing. People shared rumors on social media. Some wrote that they had been seen in another state. Others suggested an accident. The tension at headquarters reached its peak. On the 11th day, the search coordinator was forced to publicly admit, "We have not found any material evidence." All efforts seemed futile. For rescuers, this was one of the most difficult operations in recent years. A complete lack of even the slightest clue. By the end of the second week, official groups had reduced the number of raids. Helicopters were left only for daytime flights, dogs for targeted areas. But the longer the search continued, the more obvious it became that the chances of finding the Reynolds alive were dwindling. This is how the atmosphere of fruitless searches was formed. The mountains seemed to deliberately hide any traces, leaving only fatigue, anger, and the feeling that the family had simply disappeared from the map. Spring 2013. A new red line appeared on the search map, not because someone had found the Reynolds' belongings, but because random tourists had spotted a glint of metal in a remote ravine dozens of kilometers from the city. It was a narrow gully with a seasonal stream and traces of a recent landslide. When the sheriff's crew and the ranger got there, they found a charred car frame with a metal superstructure crushed on top under a layer of clay and rocks. At first glance, it looked like a pickup truck with a small camper box. The scene was processed according to procedure. The perimeter was cordoned off with tape, and the coordinates, weather, and time were noted in the report. Firefighters checked for active smoldering. A forensic investigator photographed the frame stamp and took samples of soot and soil. The license plates were burned, but the VIN stamp on one of the side members was partially preserved. The numbers had to be read from a graphite imprint. That same day, the word that everyone feared came over the radio. Possibly related. The media picked up on it within an hour. Burnt car found in Colorado. Is this the answer in the case of the missing family? The headlines appeared before the lab had time to clean the metal. The headquarters at the school came back to life. Old maps were pulled out, volunteers were called back, and specialists were invited to restore the vehicle identification numbers. The Reynolds' relatives came to the hall and sat in a row without asking any questions. The first conclusions were made on the 3rd day. The fire in the pickup truck was not accidental. The interior surfaces of the cabin showed characteristic streaks from a combustion accelerant, stains that do not form during normal electrical wiring fires. The temperature regime indicated a short but intense flash. The remains of burnt plywood and metal hinges from a small cabinet were found in the back of the truck, typical homemade camper box fittings. The most important thing was anthropology. Fragments of bones were found under a layer of ash in the cabin. A forensic anthropologist, working with brushes and tweezers, collected several pieces, part of the ulna, fragments of ribs, and a fragment of the sacrum. Preliminary assessment: one person, an adult male. There were no female or child bones in the same volume. This automatically contradicted the version about 3 people missing from Durango. However, the headquarters was in no hurry to draw conclusions. In the middle of winter and spring, the water in the ravine moves and carries away small fragments, so some of the material could have disappeared. Just in case, they combed the riverbed downstream, set up sieves, and lifted silt from the depressions. They found nothing but fragments of glass and plastic. The dog handlers searched the riverbanks, but any scent, if there was one, had long since been destroyed by the heat and previous rains. Meanwhile, the identification of the pickup truck progressed more quickly. The washed-off VN matched the registration in the name of Travis Colt, a resident of a neighboring county who disappeared in 2008. The missing persons database contained a brief note: "May have gone to the mountains, had a car trailer." This explained the camper box, but did not answer the headquarters' main question. Did the find have anything to do with the Reynolds? Formally, no. However, the information field already had a life of its own. On the 4th day, the sheriff held a briefing. The official statement was, "The identification of the vehicle points to another case. There is currently no confirmation that this is related to the disappearance of the Reynolds family." After this sentence, there was a moment that rarely makes it into the news. The room did not disperse. Journalists continued to ask about the serial nature of the cases. At least 2 cases in the same region, both involving car trailers, both without an obvious crime scene. The police responded with the phrase, "Correlation does not equal causation," but the seeds of doubt had been sown. The operation, which was already fading, suddenly received a strange impulse. The search area was expanded to include nearby forest roads, where light trailers could theoretically be parked on the side of the road. Drones with thermal imaging cameras were flown over the clearings, searching for ground anomalies that would indicate old landslides or buried objects. The most tedious tools were put to use: logging records, road work logs, old permits for driving on service roads, simple statistics. Each additional square of the map meant hours of manpower and helicopter fuel. A week later, another detail buried all hope. In one of the fragments of the pickup's interior, they found the remains of a car service token with an order number. The owner of the service confirmed that Colt had repaired the wiring in November 2007. The fragment had an identification ticket from that very year. The combination of dates shifted the possible time of the fire to the period preceding the Reynolds' disappearance. It was a different story, a different person, a different chain of events. The relatives were informed first. They listened and nodded. As they left the room, Carolyn's mother said quietly and without emotion, "We're back to square one." The phrase did not appear in the reports, but for everyone standing in the hallway, it summed up 2 weeks of tension, phone calls, and sleepless nights. Only markers remained at the site of the discovery. The tape was removed, and samples were sent to the archive. Ashes, paint scrapings, soil from 3 depths. Another group took over the Colt case. For the Reynolds case, this episode became False Lead No, Chanintor Teen. 1. It had a separate line in the internal table: fuel consumption, flight hours, number of squares covered, conclusion. Not confirmed. The consequences for the community turned out to be more sticky. The word serial sprouted in bar conversations and comments under news stories. Someone mentioned an old recluse who kept his distance and disappeared for weeks in the mountains. Someone talked about trackers without numbers on forest roads. The police were forced to publicly ask people not to spread unverified versions of events. The official position sounded dry. There is no evidence of a connection. The unofficial reality was simple. People believed in the connection. For the headquarters, this chapter ended with a review of priorities. They returned to where they started, to find at least one starting point for the Reynolds. The pickup truck in the ravine taught them a lesson. Even sensational discoveries can turn out to be someone else's stories that accidentally intersect with yours in space and time. In practice, this meant one thing: back to a blank map and a schedule of group sorties into the field. The false lead didn't just take away resources, it undermined trust. When the next call came in to headquarters about a white trailer on the old road, no one jumped up. Instead of excitement and anxiety, there was a tired routine: coordinates, verification, photos, report. And again, nothing about Michael, Carolyn, and Emma. The mountains remained silent. The official briefing at the county sheriff's office ended without any significant news, and that's what loosened everyone else's tongues. Where there are no facts, theories emerge. By the end of the second week of their disappearance, there were already 3 main theories circulating in Dolores and Durango. They got lost in the San Juan Mountains. They left to start a new life. They fell victim to a person with a specific name. Each theory had its advocates. Each had its vulnerabilities. The police stuck to a natural cause. A map with the search perimeter hung in headquarters, marked in red with the ridges and ravines where the dogs had lost the trail. CAD operators showed the timing of calls from neighbors. Dispatchers sorted through fragments of camera footage from service stations and stores along the highway. At the same time, an analyst reviewed bank card transactions to no avail. Not a single ping, not a single purchase after that morning. The official conclusion: most likely a hike, an injury, followed by a chain of fatal decisions. Relatives took this as capitulation disguised as professionalism. The family insisted otherwise. They repeated simple things. No one takes a 3-day supply of canned food on a 1-day trip and prepares thermoses for the evening if they plan to disappear. Lists with items marked in pencil were left on the kitchen table, and gloves from the basement are only taken out when you're going to rummage through scrap metal, not admire lakes. The wife's father demanded an inspection of private plots along the old service roads of gas companies. The sister called the press and asked why the sheriff was ignoring the obvious. Someone had helped them disappear. This obvious led the conversation to the third version. The third had a name. A former contractor who had been repairing fences in yards on Oak Drive since spring, a man with a pickup truck on a lift and a torn-off license plate on the tailgate. He was known for his sharp voice and his cargo trailer, which would appear and disappear in the juniper bushes near the fork in the old forest road. Several neighbors recalled that there had been tension between him and the homeowner over the past week, either over payment or the noise of the tools in the evening. The name easily sticks to the void. When the press asked for comment, he froze. And that was enough for social media to turn his silence into an indirect confession. The headquarters reacted coldly. No evidence, no case. The contractor provided gas station receipts for the day of his disappearance and showed 2 small receipts from a car repair shop. And although his alibi was full of holes, there was no legal basis for prosecution. Neighbors sighed, relatives boiled over. At a meeting in the city hall, the air conditioning system crackled subtly when a volunteer from the search group publicly asked the sheriff why private properties along BLM roads had not yet been inspected together with the owners. The sheriff responded with phrases about warrants and prudence. The audience was not impressed. The online searchers joined the game. One of them, a drone pilot, posted a map with thermal spots from last year's controlled weed burning near an abandoned pumping station. In one of the images, A dark, irregularly shaped spot resembled a metal object under a layer of branches. The headquarters looked at it, nodded, and put it in the low-priority folder. Spectral artifacts, they explained. Nothing supernatural. To the family, it sounded like, "We're too lazy." The next day, volunteers went to that square themselves, but they were turned back by rangers. It was a private strip between two sections of the reserve, and an escort was required. Conflict gives rise to memory. This scene gave rise to the popular saying in the city, "Paper hides them, not the forest." At the same time, the press phantom-fed the version of a voluntary departure. One regional website pulled a photo from the school archives from her younger years and captioned it, "Dreamed of a different life." Clickbait images of the world compete perfectly with empty reality. Relatives tried to extinguish the fire with facts. Unspent cash, insurance policies, letters from the pediatrician with records of vaccinations that no one had administered. But every time they came close to the logical conclusion of outside interference, the sheriff's lawyer would cough slightly into the microphone. "Be careful with your wording so as not to open yourself up to lawsuits." It's a kind of local mantra, similar to a prayer, only without hope. The volunteer coalition was also not homogeneous. Some insisted on water bodies, ponds on ranches downstream, hidden irrigation tanks, sedimentation ponds near old wells. Others leaned toward storage facilities, technical trailers, abandoned trailers pressed against ravines, and camouflage nets that had grown into the bushes over time. One of the senior local rescuers quietly remarked, "Even if there was a trailer there, whose key would we use to get in?" The answer came from the corner. Fires don't ask for keys. The phrase hung in the air, 6 months ahead of its truth. Meanwhile, the contractor did not disappear from the radar. Someone dug up an old police report from New Mexico about the burning of dry grass, where his name appeared in the testimony as a friend of a friend. Legally, it was worthless. In terms of information, it was gasoline on the fire. He filed a defamation suit, and commentators counted the days when, in their opinion, he would finally be handcuffed. The sheriff was caught between two pressures, pretending to listen to the community and not turning the investigation upside down with populism. The ICS rescue workers' logs for that week contained lines that seemed uninteresting at first glance. Road FR 527 closed due to erosion. Landowner on CR 124 denied access without a warrant. Thermal imaging flight uninformative due to contrast. It is precisely these details that then explain why the obvious remains invisible. At some point, a fourth, openly mythological version appeared, about people living off the map, about nomadic camps in canyons, about those who don't like questions. The headquarters did not comment on it. Relatives, even less so, but each new story distracted resources. When an anonymous letter arrived with a blurry photo of a white van on a dirt road higher up the ridge, half a day and 2 crews were sent there. At the site, they found an old pump shed and footprints that did not match anything specific. The photographer, as is often the case, photographed his own imagination. Meanwhile, the family did what no one expected them to do. They hired a private LIDAR. A small team from the university arrived with a pickup truck and a scanner, obtained permission to fly over the BLM strip between 2 private plots, and scanned 3 lines. In the raw image, which they quietly sent to the officials, geometry could be seen among the dense mosaic of bushes, a rectangle with a tail, like a trailer, and a darker flash nearby. In the report, it was listed as an abnormal landform. No field verification took place. The area fell within the window of seasonal fire danger, and access was restricted. The dispute was stuck between 2 folders: risks and priorities. When fatigue replaced anger, the theories began to diverge. Everyone stuck to their own, not because it was the best, but because without it, there would be silence. The officials blamed a bad route and bad luck. The family blamed someone's will and a hidden place. The city blamed a familiar face that could be pointed at. And while the sides weighed their arguments, the summer grew drier, the grass more brittle, and the forest half a tone closer to the state where fires don't ask for keys. This was not yet the denouement. It was the price paid by cities where the truth is not hidden in the depths, but a few meters away from someone else's fence. 4 years have passed since that morning when the Reynolds family left their home in Durango, and no one has seen them since. The time, which in the first weeks was counted in hours and days, gradually dissolved into months and seasons. The headquarters was once buzzing with radio stations, constantly updating maps, coordinating helicopters and dog handlers. Now all that remained was a paper archive. Thick folders labeled Reynolds Case, gathering dust on the shelves of the county office. Officially, the investigation was not closed. The file had the status active, suspended, meaning it could be reopened at any moment. Unofficially, everyone understood that the case was as frozen as the peaks of the San Juan Mountains in January. Every time a new investigator came to the department, they were shown these volumes as an example of an unsolved case. And almost always, after a few weeks, interest faded. For the relatives, time worked differently. Carolyn's parents continued to attend the annual missing persons meetings, bringing photos of their daughter and granddaughter. In the photos, Emma remained a girl with pigtails, who was 7 at the time of her disappearance. In reality, she would have been 11. This feeling of time standing still was the most painful, unable to bury her or wait. In Durango, the case became a local myth. In bars, people recounted various versions, from an accidental landslide to stories about a hermit with a trailer who was supposedly hiding in the mountains. The local press reported on it from time to time, but there were no new facts. The old information went round and round in circles. The disappearance, the search, the false lead with someone else's pickup truck. Sometimes a new witness would come forward. In 2015, someone claimed to have seen a white trailer on the old road near the pass. They checked it out. There was only an abandoned pump house there. In 2017, a blurry photo of a similar family at a gas station in Utah appeared. The cameras provided a clearer image. They were tourists from Idaho. Each such discovery gave a brief flash of hope, and then turned out to be nothing. The sheriff's department even introduced an internal code. Reynolds lead, 24 hours. This meant that each new call was checked for a maximum of 24 hours, and if it was not confirmed, it was closed without further resources. It was a way to protect the department from an endless spiral of rumors. For the city, life went on. Basketball was played again in the school gym, the former headquarters, and the yellow tape that once marked the search perimeter lay rolled up in boxes. Only in the conversations of the old-timers did the question sometimes come up. How could it be that not even a fragment of belongings had been found? Psychologically, this became a burden for those who were directly involved in the search. Several former volunteers admitted to journalists that they felt that the mountains had deceived them. One of the helicopter pilots said after his retirement that he still remembered the coordinates of the sectors where nothing had been found. And every time he flew over San Juan, he was haunted by a feeling of defeat. Meanwhile, the Reynolds relatives hired private investigators. They reviewed old evidence, made their own trips, and even tried using private drones with thermal imaging cameras. The result was the same. The mountain was empty. Over the years, another shadow appeared, a financial one. Carolyn's family had accumulated debts for lawyers, private searches and equipment rentals. Reports slipped into the media about parents who spent everything on fruitless searches. This created an image of a tragedy that destroys not only lives, but also the finances of families. In police circles, the Reynolds disappearance became a symbol of a blank spot. When talking about problems in cases of people missing in the Colorado mountains, this case was always mentioned. The word Reynolds became a label, a description of a situation where there is no body, no crime scene, and no evidence. 4 years turned the tragedy into a chronic wound for the community. Some believed that the family was alive and hiding somewhere. Others believed that they had long since passed away. The official line remained unchanged. There is not enough data to draw conclusions. Years without answers became the worst sentence, because even a fragment of bone or a piece of clothing can bring closure. Here, there was only emptiness, and the longer it lasted, the more it seemed that the earth itself was hiding the truth and would only reveal it when it wanted to. The year was 2019. After the rains, the Forest Service and rangers checked the old service roads between private plots and the BLM Strip. On paper, it was a routine erosion audit. On the ground, it turned into a discovery. In a narrow ravine below the ridge, which had previously been inaccessible due to a blocked passage, they found traces of an ancient camp. The scene was secured. The perimeter was marked with tape, and the coordinates were recorded with an accuracy of several meters. They photographed rusty gasoline cans, 2 twisted tin cans, a charred stone hearth, and pieces of blue tarpaulin that had grown into the bushes. Near the fire lay a metal wire twisted into loops and a short tape measure. In the dust were fragments of ties. 5 meters from the hearth, they collected cartridge cases of various calibers, 9mm and 22. A note appeared in the report: not a recreational campfire, long-term stay. When the ranger dug up the ground near the boulder, a leather holster without a knife was pulled out from under the clay. The letters GB were clearly visible on the piece. It was not factory embossing, but burned letters, handmade, like a personal mark. Next to it, they found a fragment of a cheap blowtorch. It could have been used for burning and lighting. On the back of the cover, there was a sketch, a line of a ridge, 2 beams, a cross in a place that lay outside the official trails. Then came the routine. We took impressions from smooth surfaces, in vain, collected controlled soil samples, bags with cartridge cases, a holster, pieces of wire, and ties. We took separate samples of charcoal from the center. The resin layers indicated several phases of burning, at least 3 summers. The bones of small animals with incisions were packed as biomaterial. The camp looked like a working site. People lived here for weeks, not just staying overnight by chance. An offline map showed that the camp was located on a narrow strip of state-owned land between 2 private plots. It was this chessboard that had blocked inspections for years. On one side was the owner's gate, on the other was a seasonal ban on access due to fire hazard. When the owner changed, a short window of access opened. Now it was possible to assume that the old, anomalous spots were traces of someone's life. A database check revealed a name. There were no serial numbers left on the canisters, but the box of ammunition had a barcode with half of the store code for a chain in Farmington, New Mexico. The store confirmed the sale in 2009-2010, but there was no personal identification. Instead, a report surfaced in the sheriff's archives. Boyd Garrett, warning for illegal campfire on public land, 2008. The notes mentioned a pickup truck without a license plate frame, a tendency toward solitude, and a conflict with a ranger. The name was added to the persons of interest section. The trash was multi-layered, coffee cans with soot inside, mini stoves, crumpled aluminum foil with cuts, homemade coasters, rope faded by the sun. It had been lying in the open for years. The camp was spread over 2 terraces. The upper one was a bed under an awning. The lower one was a fireplace and a workshop. This is how those who hide smoke and do not shine from the road arrange their places. The investigation team returned once more with metal detectors. 2 signals were detected above the center: a piece of chain and a flat plate with a hole, similar to an improvised bracket. Next to it was a dark spot of grease that had soaked into the ground. The theory about equipment, a winch, jack, generator, no longer seemed like a fantasy. If large items were hidden somewhere in these beams, a lever or hoist would have been necessary. The relatives were told about the camp without any details. The wording was dry. Traces of long-term habitation have been found in a sector previously inaccessible for inspection. They asked only one question: could this be the place where their loved ones were held? The answer was standard: we cannot confirm, we cannot deny. Legally, the camp had no connection to the case, only context. Inside the agency, they compiled a list: holster, GB, mixed caliber cartridges, multi-layer waste, traces of tools, sketch of the area. Next to it, columns: risks, priorities. Risks: private boundaries, fire hazard. Priorities: water intakes downstream, ravines where heavy objects accumulate after heavy rains. They added a recommendation for LiDAR scanning of a narrow strip of BLM land between 2 private plots. In the margins, written in pencil, "Return in the fall." Boyd's name did not make the headlines at the time, but the coincidences kept piling up. In the DMV database, an old pickup truck without a license plate frame. In the Forest Service, 2 complaints about a man who sleeps in the ravines and scares people away with gunshots in 2009-2010. The chronology coincided with the time of his disappearance. For the case, this was not a solution, but a change of scale. The map was no longer blank. An area appeared that someone controlled. It overlapped with the perimeter of the future 2023 landslide. A new package of evidence was added to the Reynolds case folder: a holster, shell casings, soil samples, and photos of a sketch. Handwritten on the cover was Beam FR 527, Camp GB. Then there was a pause. The fire season began, and access was restricted again. The teams were reassigned to other incidents. The camp was overshadowed, like dozens of other places in the mountains. But from then on, every time route unknown appeared in internal memos, someone in the field would add in small print, "except for that ravine." It would be the line they would return to when the earth shifted and revealed what the rocks and time had hidden. August 2023. After several days of heavy thunderstorms, a landslide occurred on the slopes of the San Juan Mountains. Rocks, clods of soil, and fragments of old trees blocked the narrow service road that led to the former mining areas. For the road service, it was a routine summer job to restore passage after a natural disaster. For investigators, it was the beginning of an unexpected breakthrough in a case that seemed forgotten. During the cleanup, one of the bulldozers stopped. The operators initially thought that the bucket had hit a concrete block or an old tank, but a rectangular fragment appeared from under a layer of clay and metal debris. They removed the top layer, and it became clear that these were the remains of a trailer. Its body was charred, and the metal was brittle from high temperatures. The sheriff and forensic experts were immediately called to the scene. They cordoned off the area because it became clear that these were not just debris, but the potential site of a tragedy. When the perimeter was cleared, the picture looked even bleaker. The trailer stood in a narrow ravine, hidden from view by tall fir trees. Judging by the nature of the damage, the fire had happened a long time ago. The metal was corroded, and the wooden elements had turned to charcoal. Inside, there were fragments of bones. At first, they were not even recognized as human. So badly had they been damaged by the fire. Later, experts confirmed that there were at least 3 skeletal remains, 2 adults and 1 child. There were traces of soot on the walls of the trailer, but the source of the fire was localized, in the back, where the kitchen used to be. This led investigators to suspect arson. The discovery instantly revived the old Reynolds case. Journalists learned the details the very next day. A burned-out trailer with human remains has been found in Colorado. It is believed to be a family that disappeared 14 years ago. The reports contain precise descriptions of the location. Beam FR 527, an area that was never checked at the time due to the difficulty of access. And it was here that the charred structure now stood. It was striking that the helicopters that combed the region in 2009 did not notice anything. Experts explained this as follows. The trailer stood in the shadow of a mountain ledge, hidden by tree crowns, and there were no thermal anomalies left after the fire. Forensic experts began to collect everything that had survived. In the ashes, they found pieces of household items, a spoon, keys, a metal mug. Some items were twisted and charred, but recognizable. Next to them lay a charred child's shoe with a Velcro fastener. It became a symbol of the tragedy that had been uncovered. Photos of the shoe appeared in all the local news. Special attention was paid to the gasoline cans. They were standing near the entrance and looked as if they had been placed there deliberately. Experts did not rule out that they were the source of the fire. This was another argument in favor of the theory of outside interference. For relatives who had been waiting for years for any news, the news was both a relief and a blow. They were shown only the official confirmation. The remains, probably belonging to Michael, Carolyn, and Emmy, were found in the trailer. But final confirmation will only be possible after DNA testing. Investigators began to piece together a new timeline of events. If the family died in the trailer, who set it on fire and why, and then left it on a remote beam? Why couldn't they be found when the search operation involved hundreds of people and equipment? And most importantly, who left a holster with the initials GB in a camp nearby several years earlier? There were no answers yet. But for the first time in many years, the case had material evidence. And this evidence left no doubt. The Reynolds had indeed died in the mountains. The only question now was whether it was a tragedy caused by natural forces or someone's carefully planned work. The atmosphere of that August was conveyed in detail in the reports. The smell of burning even years later, smoke stains on the metal walls, the silence of the mountain ravine, where now only a burnt-out trailer box stood. It came as a shock to the community. The legend of the missing family turned into a murder story that had been waiting for years for a landslide to reveal the hidden truth. August 2023. The narrow ravine where the trailer was found became the site of one of the most thorough forensic investigations in Colorado in recent years. Every piece of land around the charred box was photographed, mapped, and packed into separate labeled bags. The work took weeks, and only then did the materials begin to arrive at the laboratories. Forensic experts worked on the remains. 3 sets of bones confirmed, 2 adults and a child. Several fragments had holes with characteristic marks. Bullets had passed through the bone tissue. 2 of them were stuck in the spine and ribs. Forensic analysis showed that different calibers were used, 9mm and .22. This immediately ruled out the possibility of an accidental fire or carbon monoxide poisoning. Before their deaths, there was a shooting in the trailer. Dozens of small metal fragments and burnt objects were recovered along with the bones. Among them was a knife with a melted handle. There were no traces left on it that could identify it, but the very fact that a cold weapon was found in the ashes indicated that the family did not die instantly and that a struggle had taken place. Another item proved to be key. A metal keychain in the shape of a plate was found in the ashes under a layer of melted glass. Although partially destroyed by fire, the letters GB were clearly visible on it. For investigators, this was the second coincidence with the same initials. The first appeared in 2019, when a holster with a similar burn mark was found in an abandoned camp nearby. Now the artifact came directly from the trailer where the family died. The archives brought up the case of Garrett Boyd, a former miner who, after the mine closed, settled as a recluse in the mountains. He had alcohol problems and several old reports for violating the rules of staying on public land. In 2008, he was detained for lighting a fire outside the permitted area. The report at the time stated, "Pickup truck with trailer, homemade weapon, aggressive behavior." His surname had already appeared in internal documents after the discovery of the camp with canisters and shell casings, but at that time, there was insufficient evidence. Now the investigation had a direct match, an item with the initials GB at the site of the family's death. The suspect, however, had long been dead. In 2012, Boyd's cabin in New Mexico burned down in a fire, and his body was found among the ruins. According to the official version, it was an accident caused by a stove. At the time, no one linked him to the Reynolds' disappearance. The experts reported dryly. The report mentioned bullets, a knife, a keychain, and the remains of gasoline cans. Conclusion: the family's death was the result of violent actions. For the police, this meant one thing: the Reynolds had been killed. The trailer had been set on fire to destroy evidence, and the structure itself had subsequently been buried by a landslide. For the community and relatives, it sounded like a long-awaited but painful conclusion. For 14 years, they had lived with a feeling of emptiness. Now, they had an answer, but without any hope for justice. The killer had long been buried. Several personal items were returned to the relatives: a burnt mug, keys, a child's shoe. Everything else remained in the archives as evidence. At a short briefing, the sheriff said dryly, "We can confirm that the Reynolds family was the victim of a crime. The prime suspect is Garrett Boyd. He died in 2012. The case will be closed." For the officers, that was the end of the process. For the family, it was the end of their illusions. They got a name, but not the answer to the main question: why? Why did an ordinary family who went to the mountains for the weekend become the target of a recluse? Was it a random attack, or was it planned in advance? The newspapers ran headlines: "The Durango missing persons were killed. The suspect is dead." Local residents argued for a long time about whether Boyd could have dragged the trailer into the ravine alone, or if someone else had helped him. There was no evidence, only speculation. The final lines of the report were mundane. All three died as a result of gunshot wounds. Accidental circumstances have been ruled out. But behind these dry words lay a story that spanned more than a decade. The case was closed, but the memory remained. For the community, it was a symbol that the mountains could hide the truth for years. For the relatives, it was an unhealed wound. They knew who was to blame, but they did not hear and would not hear any explanations. The story of the Reynolds family ended not with a solution, but with silence that spoke louder than any verdict.